If we always owe more money back to the banks than is ever in the economy at any one time because money only ever enters the system through lending with interest due back on it, then by design someone has to be left out in the cold at the end of every month when bills need to be paid. That's why economists say we can never achieve 100% employment, because someone has to lose or the system is not working the way it's supposed to. Conservatives claim churches provide stability for those who fall through the cracks and could better do their jobs if government would stay out of the business of helping people, while also they advocate for lowering or ending taxing income so there would be more money to donate to charities. They don't, however, have a plan for how to seal the cracks in the system people fall through. In fact, they seem to relish in those cracks being there, like they're the bullwhip that keeps us moving forward and finding ever more creative ways to pay our bills so wealthy people can enjoy the freedom that a capitalist-based market provides for them. A good conservative is one who pays their bills on time no matter how much they have to struggle to do it, while the American dream is the right to be able to pay them so we can have a roof over our head, food in our stomach, and enough security to raise children who will later take our place and seeing to it that rich people can make lots of money lending us what they believe is their money. When I dig a little further back in history to find out what inspired the American Revolution and how the economy was run immediately after it, then how it changed to the kind of lend and tax system we have now, I wonder if Tea Party members would do better to broaden their scope of our past as well as how it's relevant to the way society is governed today. They're trying to say that the Boston Tea Party sparked the American Revolution, but that's not an accurate portrayal of what led to the founding of the United States. The Boston Tea Party was the first sign of flames coming from the kindling that grew into the bonfire that gave birth to this country. The spark that inspired a smoldering hatred for the king's taxes, however, actually goes back to 1763, when on a visit to England, Ben Franklin was summoned before the board of directors of the Bank of England to answer for how the American colonies' economies were doing so well while England suffered through a financial collapse not unlike the one we're having now. Since all money is lent into the economy with interest due back on it, more and more money has to be lent into the economy with more interest to be paid on it, so there's enough money to compete for in order to pay back the debts on the loans. It's like a game of musical chairs where instead of taking away chairs, more and more are added as the music drums on, but never enough for everyone to get a seat when the music stops. Then a critical point is reached where there's so much interest owed on the debt that no more can be lent into the system and the music stops. Then the chairs have to be taken away in rapid succession in order to rein in all the capital on the streets so a new game, perhaps Duck, Duck, Goose, can begin. The interim period between when money flows out to then be reined back in again has always served as a time for governments and banks to regroup to come up with new plans for the future, because so much property inadvertently winds up back in their hands as loans default, much like the housing market is now, where after we build our homes, then get loans from banks to buy them from ourselves with, when their way of running the economy breaks, our homes go back to them so they can use them to keep making more money. In this way, whenever our economy slows down to an impoverished trickle, we become more eager to work harder for less compensation, thus giving the banks a clean slate from which to drive our economy to the next position they will crash it from. Like with this new green economy we're getting ready to build now. We should have done it 40 years ago after the energy crisis of the 1970s. But there wasn't enough profits to be made by banks investing in a new direction back then. They could have done it and been making bigger profits than they are now, but banks like quick and easy money, not profits that come over the long haul as if we're all in this game together. They're the ones with the money. We're the ones without it. This means they control the future, which is why they work so hard to keep it this way, because it is the way they like it. If they invested in the best ways that suited everyone, then it would be like we're all sitting at the same table as them with our interests represented equally. So what would be the point of having all that wealth and power? Of course, there is the part of having all that wealth and power, but somehow that seems to elude them, so fast money is the name of the game. Leading up to the American Revolution, since North America was so rich in natural resources that hadn't been depleted like those in Europe, money wasn't needed for Americans to survive. So after all the gold and silver was shipped back to Europe during a banker's downswing on the economy, Americans kept right on working, not relying on imports to keep their businesses afloat like they had to do back in Britain. Then they traded through bartering, which eventually led to printing paper. Well, here, let's let Benjamin Franklin explain it in the same words he used when answering the Bank of England's inquiry about why our economy wasn't failing like theirs was. He said, "That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It's called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportions to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from products to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to anyone." What followed is what Tea Parties need to pay attention to. You see, a legitimate government can both spend and lend money into circulation, while banks can only lend significant amounts of their promissory banknotes, for they can neither give away nor spend but a tiny fraction of the money the people need. The key word in the comment is legitimate government. In Washington, D.C. today, the idea of a legitimate government is undermined by the same kinds of bankers Franklin is explaining about how replacing them as the sole cash providers to the economy with a legitimate government makes an economy work. He goes on to say, "Thus, when your bankers here in England place money in circulation, there is always a debt principal to be returned and usury to be paid. The result is that you have always too little credit in circulation to give the workers full employment. You do not have too many workers, you have too little money in circulation, and that which circulates all bears the endless burden of unpayable debt and usury." Colonial scrip was how the 13 colonies solved the same problem we have now, by each one issuing different paper through their individual legitimate governments, where it was either lent with little or no interest or spent by the government directly into the local economy. As long as the money was put towards producing real products and services to support the local economy, it worked fine. Their economies boomed, everyone had plenty, everyone had hopes, and the American dream was born on the back of hard work that was rewarded without having to pay the banker or the king. Franklin's answers were not what the Bank of England wanted to hear. The colonies were just that, outcroppings of Britain, property of the royal family. So why should Americans be living high on the hog while England starved? In response, an order was given requiring that taxes in the colonies could only be paid by gold or silver. Since it was too hard to come up with 13 ever-evolving exchange rates for gold and silver, their economies eventually became too cumbersome to manage, so printing paper was ended. Franklin later wrote about what followed the new tax law. In 1 year, the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended and a depression set in, to such an extent that the streets of the colonies were filled with unemployed. This, however, left Americans bitter, as they had gotten the first taste of freedom from greedy bankers and taxing kings in the history of money being used for trade, and they didn't forget it either. This is what preceded the Boston Tea Party that was then followed by the American Revolution. This is the real story behind the Boston Tea Party. As Franklin put it in his autobiography, the colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters if it had not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of King George and the international banks was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War. I know it's hard for people who call themselves conservatives, which I think most of them truly want to believe that capitalism is not a conservative ideal. In truth, it's anything but. It is what the American Revolution was fought to put an end to on American soil. Capitalism had been around for many ages before we followed suit in administering the United States economy by the same rules the royal families of Europe did. This country was founded after evidence surfaced for the first time in history that an economy didn't have to be backed by gold or silver coins with the king's head on it being lent out, then paid back with interest to the king's bankers. And it wasn't just freedom from the king they sought either. They had found that this new way of providing an economy worked better. What I mean is, if the king hadn't put an end to their experiment but rather supported and adopted it himself, they would have gladly followed his lead. Of course, a king would never do such a thing because his brand of economy was designed to give him control over his subjects, which is as it is today under the capitalist system we have now. Only the king's bankers don't have to answer to the king, so they control us directly.